Over in the Netherlands, a big investment deal was inked between leading South Korean and Dutch chip companies in time for President Yoon's visit to the ASML headquarters. Today, the South Korean leader sits down with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte to further cement a chip alliance. South Korea plans to inject funds worth $29 billion into the rechargeable battery market over the span of 5 years to ramp up its competitive edge amid supply chain concerns. Pyeongchang is all set once again to host the Winter Games, this time for young people from all over the world. With the 2024 Youth Winter Olympics about a month away in the country's Gangwon province, we take a look at what's being done to inspire thousands of young athletes. It's December 13th, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. Over in the Netherlands, a joint investment deal was inked between leading South Korean and Dutch chip companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This as President Yoon Suk-yeol visited the ASML headquarters, having highlighted semiconductor cooperation as the focus of his state visit to that country. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Soo-young begins our coverage.
South Korean and Dutch chip giants will jointly invest over $700 million to foster next-generation semiconductor technology and young specialists, as President Yoon Suk-yeol aims to solidify a semiconductor alliance with the Netherlands. On Tuesday, the South Korean leader visited the production facility of ASML, the world's biggest supplier of lithography machines, crucial for making semiconductors. Accompanied by Dutch King Willem-Alexander and the heads of Samsung and SK hynix, Lee Jae-yong and Chae Tae-won, Yoon oversaw the signing of 3 memorandums of understanding on developing cutting-edge microchips, which make up almost 20% of South Korea's exports.
ASML이 만들어낸 반도체 산업의 혁신은 인공지능, 5G, 모빌리티 등 4차 산업혁명의 강력한 동력이 되고 있습니다. 앞으로 한국 기업들과 긴밀히 협력해서 반도체 산업의 혁신과 글로벌 공급망 안정화를 위해 노력해 주시기를 기대합니다.
Samsung and ASML agreed to jointly invest some $763 million into an R&D center based in South Korea to develop ultrafine processing technology based on next-generation extreme ultraviolet or EUV lithography. Meanwhile, SK hynix also signed a deal with ASML to co-develop hydrogen recovery technology for EUVs, recycling rather than burning hydrogen to use as process gas. This is expected to reduce power usage by around 20% and save $12.5 billion in costs annually. Another MOU was reached between the Korean and Dutch governments to establish a chip academy for graduate students beginning in February, involving the two nations' top chip-related firms and institutions, including Samsung and ASML, to offer practical training with cutting-edge equipment and facilities.
Growing talent together and sharing know-how is something that only a true semiconductor alliance can do, and we expect that exchanges between future generations in the industry will become more active.
Yoon's economic secretary noted that the deals were inked as global foundries like Samsung, TSMC and Intel scrambled to master the production of ultrafine 2nm chips, around 10 to 15 times faster than 3nm models, which were first mass-produced last year by Samsung. As their rivalry intensifies, he noted that the president toured ASML's cleanroom facility, featuring an advanced lithography machine which has never been shown publicly before. This, he said, casts optimistic prospects for South Korean firms looking to secure key materials and equipment to boost their chip-making capacity. Celebrating the budding cooperation, the South Korean leader and the Dutch king both signed a semiconductor wafer for display at the cleanroom facility.
President Yoon will further discuss strengthening bilateral chip cooperation with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte when they meet at The Hague on Wednesday. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Amsterdam.
And prior to that summit scheduled for Wednesday, President Yoon and Dutch King Willem-Alexander reaffirmed a cordial friendship at a state banquet. Also noted was the two countries' deep history of bilateral relations over 60 years in the making. Correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
At the first state banquet for a South Korean president at the Royal Palace of Amsterdam on Tuesday, President Yoon Suk-yeol gave a special shout-out to the Dutchman that brought a special moment to all Koreans in recent history.
2002년 대한민국 국민들의 가슴을 뜨겁게 달군 월드컵 4강 신화의 중심에는 네덜란드 출신의 명장 거스 히딩크 감독이 계십니다. 어디 계십니까?
This was his way of showing that South Korea and the Netherlands share a deep relationship that goes beyond semiconductor cooperation. The diplomatic relationship was established more than 60 years ago, and the two countries last year upgraded the relationship to a strategic partnership. Also, he reminded everyone that the first Westerner to become naturalized to what at the time was the Joseon dynasty was a Dutchman, Jan Jans Beltevre, or in Korean, Pagyeon. King Willem-Alexander also noted that South Korea has grown tremendously in just a couple of years, and Koreans and the Dutch are culturally connected.
The Republic of Korea is everywhere. There's K-pop on the radio, K-movies in the cinema, K-dramas on Netflix, and K-food in the supermarket.
Above all, the two leaders underscore the shared values that the two countries are based on, something that has become increasingly important with uncertainties around the world.
국제법 질서를 발전시켜야 할 의무를 헌법에 규정한 네덜란드야말로 규범 기반 국제 질서를 선도하고 있는 것입니다. 대한민국도 세계의 자유, 평화, 번영을 위해 책임과 기여를 다하는 글로벌 중추 국가로서 규범 기반 국제 질서의 강화에 힘을 쏟고 있습니다.
This comes as President Yoon started official engagements for the state visit on Tuesday at the welcoming ceremony at Dam Square in Amsterdam, which included a 21-gun salute and a greeting from Korean children. After heading inside the palace, the president and the Dutch king introduced their delegations, including Prime Minister Mark Rutte. Prime Minister Rutte, according to President Yoon himself, is one of the leaders most close to him on the global scene. And Yoon was accompanied by Rutte as he went to lay a wreath at the National Monument at the Dam to commemorate the Dutch war heroes. The official welcoming at the palace ended with a luncheon hosted by the king. There, President Yoon thanked the king for his hospitality, saying his state visit to South Korea in 2014, a first for a Dutch king, boosted the bilateral relationship back then, and his visit to the Netherlands is another milestone. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Later in the day, the South Korean president is expected to visit Ridderzaal and the Yoon Peace Museum in The Hague as part of his state visit. Yoon brings us what historical significance these places in the Netherlands hold for Korea.
A city in the Netherlands, The Hague, holds sites with special meaning to Korean history. First is the Ridderzaal, a venue where the Second Hague Peace Conference was held back in 1907. 3 secret envoys of Korea tried to attend the conference to appeal to the international community about the unfairness of the 1905 treaty Japan forcibly imposed on Korea. Amid growing pressure from Japan, Emperor Gojong of the Korean Empire sent 3 envoys, Ijun, Isang-seol, and Iwijong, to the conference. However, the mission failed due to obstruction by Japan, and Ijun was later found dead at the hotel they were staying at. While the cause of his death is unclear, the ideals that the patriot Ijun stood for later transformed the place of his death, Hotel Deong, into the Ijun Peace Museum. The Ijun Peace Museum was established in August 1995 on the 50th anniversary of Korea's liberation to preserve a place of importance to Korea's independence movement in Europe, while serving as an educational site to teach future generations about the spirit of patriotism and peace around the world. Its exhibits include handwritten documents and news article clippings from the time, alongside other historical artifacts. According to local media, President Yoon will visit Ridderzaal and Ijun Peace Museum and will express his determination to defend democracy and world peace based on South Korea's strong national defense capabilities and global leadership. The president's visit to The Hague comes during his state visit to the Netherlands to strengthen semiconductor cooperation and other ties. Yoon, Arirang News.
Korean financial authorities plan to inject some 38 trillion won, that's almost $30 billion, for Korea's rechargeable battery market over the course of 5 years. It's to ramp up its competitive edge amid concerns over supply chains. An Sung-jin explains.
The South Korean government plans to inject some $29 billion into the rechargeable battery industry over the space of 5 years from 2024. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho, in an emergency economic meeting on Wednesday, discussed ways to enhance industrial competitiveness in the rechargeable battery industry.
We plan to actively support facility investment in promising rechargeable battery companies and to develop core technologies such as all-solid-state batteries. We will also shorten the patent examination period from the current 21 months to 10 months by prioritizing rechargeable battery patents.
It also plans to foster an ecosystem for recycled batteries in order to reduce dependency on critical raw material supplies from abroad. Instead of treating used batteries as waste, the plan is to transform them into recyclable products if they meet the criteria. If recycled, some can be remanufactured for electric vehicles, while those that are difficult to reuse will be recycled by extracting only valuable metals such as lithium and nickel. The government estimated that if all used batteries were recycled, it would secure enough key minerals for 170,000 electric vehicles annually, which is half of what Hyundai and Kia produce in a year. To further stabilize the supply chain, the government will increase loans for related companies and support interest rate reductions for facility investment in North America in response to the Inflation Reduction Act. To support critical raw material reserves and prevent a supply chain crisis in the long term, it plans to invest in building storage facilities by 2026 to store lithium, cobalt, and other vital raw materials for rechargeable batteries. At the meeting, measures to combat shrinkflation or package downsizing were also discussed. Data from the Korea Consumer Agency found that nearly 40 items have been downsized over the past 1 year. The government will seek to make it necessary for sellers to show any dosage changes on product packaging and for them to indicate the unit price.
It will become mandatory to label any changes on goods. We plan to thoroughly check whether this is properly implemented through consumer agencies or reporting centers.
The government also pledged to pay close attention to inflation and amend relevant regulations if necessary. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Amid recent urea import concerns triggered by supply issues in China, South Korea is seeking ways to diversify its sources of key industrial materials to stabilize supply chains. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy announced today that it will establish robust industrial supply chains for 185 designated items, including graphite and magnetic rare earth metals. Under the strategy, the country aims to lower its dependency on specific countries for certain resources to under 50% by 2030, down from last year's 70%. To achieve this goal, the government plans to support domestic production of key materials wherever possible. Also on the local front, employment expanded in November as well, albeit at a smaller size on month. Park Gon-woo covers the latest numbers.
South Korea's employment figures rose once again last month, but with a smaller increase in October. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, 277,000 jobs were added on year in November, bringing the total number of workers aged 15 and over to some 28,600,000.
By industry, employment numbers were added especially in the science, health, and welfare and IT sectors, and by age, those aged 60 and above, and people in their 30s and 50s attributed to the increasing figures.
But figures for other sectors, including education and real estate, all fell. Job additions had been on the increase from July, reaching a peak of 346,000 new jobs on year in October. But additions dropped last month, with fewer jobs in the accommodation and food service sector, which fell 50,000 in October to less than 10,000 last month. Statistics Korea also said the slower pace of increasing jobs was due to the base effect, as employment soared after the easing of COVID-19 measures. Manufacturing jobs have fallen for 11 straight months since January, with a decrease of 110,000 workers last month, which also contributed to November's smaller increase. Last month's employment rate of 63.1% was an all-time high for any November since records were first compiled in 1982. An official from Statistics Korea said that the increasing demand for babysitters after COVID-19 boosted the employment rate, especially among women in their 50s. In terms of the unemployment figures, there was a drop for people in their 20s and a rise for those in their 50s, with the total remaining at 2.3%, the same as last November. Park Geon-woo, Arirang News.
Starting Thursday, foreigners will be allowed to invest in the South Korean stock market without prior authorization. The Financial Services Commission has announced that accessibility to local markets for foreign investors will be enhanced with the abolition of the foreign investor registration system. Currently, foreigners are obligated to register with the Financial Supervisory Service before investing in the local stock market. This registration process has been identified as an obstacle for foreigners entering the local stock market, as it's considered time-consuming and requires various documents for registration. Turning to the Israel-Hamas war, amid U.S. President Joe Biden calling for a change in Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's hardline approach over Gaza, he will be sending his top security advisor and defense chief to Israel sooner than later. Moon Hae-ryun explains what this could bring to the conflict in the war zone.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is set to travel to Israel within the week to discuss a timetable for the war as Israel and its longtime ally, the United States, face diplomatic isolation over bombings in Gaza. Another top White House official, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, will visit next week to reiterate U.S. President Joe Biden's message to protect civilian lives in the war-torn region. Biden warned his Israeli counterpart that the indiscriminate bombing against Hamas was hurting global support, proven by the non-binding resolution passed in the United Nations General Assembly on Tuesday, which called for a humanitarian ceasefire. An overwhelming majority of 153 countries voted in favor, while only 10, including the U.S., voted against, showing the consensus regarding the conflict. Biden also said that Netanyahu needed to change his government dominated by hardline right parties, calling it the most conservative government in Israel's history, as they ultimately can't say no to an independent Palestinian state. The Israeli Prime Minister admitted that while there was a disagreement between the two allies, he expressed hope that the two sides could reach an agreement regarding what he called the post-Hamas Gaza Strip. While Sullivan is due to hold talks about this matter, Netanyahu is against Biden's idea to allow the Palestinian Authority to govern the Gaza Strip following the end of the armed conflict. This rift between the U.S. and Israel and the show of global support for a ceasefire comes amid continued airstrikes in the enclave, creating what the chief of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has called hell on earth. Hamas officials said that at least 50 people were killed in the bombings following the UN General Assembly meeting. More than 18,000 Palestinians have reportedly been killed, with many being women or children. Meanwhile, Reuters reported that there are 135 hostages still being held captive by Hamas, while the Israeli government commented that 19 are presumed to have been killed. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Countries have struck a UN climate deal calling for a transition away from fossil fuels. At the COP28 climate summit in Dubai on Wednesday, representatives from almost 200 nations agreed to reduce global consumption of fossil fuels to avoid the worst climate catastrophe. The agreement, which comes after 2 weeks of hard-fought debates, is the first of its kind to have language on fossil fuels. The approved deal pushes the nations to make plans to break off from coal, oil, and gas in order to achieve net zero by 2050. It also urges countries to triple their renewable energy capacity globally by 2030. Thinking about winter here in Korea, one iconic event that comes to mind is the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. Well, 6 years later, Korea is gearing up to host the Winter Olympics once again, this time for aspiring young talents. As we count down to the 2024 Gangwon Winter Youth Olympics, our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin gives us a sneak peek into what awaits us in just over a month.
As we get ready for another thrilling year in sports, 2024 gets off to a thrilling start with the Winter Youth Olympics Gangwon 2024. The Youth Olympic Games is for teens aged between 15 and 18 years old. It's held every 4 years and has the same sports and disciplines as the regular Winter Olympics we're familiar with.
South Korea is the first country in Asia to host the Youth Winter Games and the only one on the continent to host the Summer, Winter and Youth Olympic Games. Around 19,000 athletes and staff from over 80 countries are set to take part in the event.
Young athletes will have a chance to compete on the same courses and venues that Olympians did a few years ago. You can't miss out on curling when talking about the Winter Olympics in Korea after Team Kim won Korea's first ever curling Olympic medal at the 2018 Pyeongchang Games. Korea's curlers are hoping to make history again.
We're determined to give our all at the game so that we can secure a gold medal at the exact venue where Team Kim, who are from the same hometown as us, clinched silver.
Adding a fresh twist to the games is ice hockey. On top of the traditional 6-team tournament, the Youth Olympics exclusively has a 3-on-3 tournament. Meanwhile, over in Pyeongchang County, the Alpensia Sliding Center has lowered the starting line for the luge so that the course is smoother and less steep for the safety of the young athletes. And at the nearby ski jumping center, it's not just about competing. The venue will also host a range of hands-on events for teenagers, from mini ski jumping to cross-country skiing tryouts. With little more than a month left, Gangwon province is making last-minute preparations so that teenagers, just like its slogan, can grow together. The Youth Olympic Games will kick off on January 19th and run until February 1st. 송유진, Arirang News, Pyeongchang.
Temperatures will stay milder than usual nationwide. The highs in Seoul will rise up to 10 degrees Celsius. But from tomorrow to Friday, there will be some severe winter rain all over the country. After this rain stops, an Arctic cold wave of around minus 10 degrees Celsius will come around. This weekend, the morning temperature in Seoul will plummet to minus 11 degrees Celsius, diving into cold winter conditions. As for the amount of rain, over 120 millimeters of rain is expected in Gangwon-do province by Friday. More than 100 millimeters of heavy rain will fall in Gyeonggi-do, Chungcheong-do, and Gyeongsang-do provinces. 30 to 80 millimeters in Seoul and other central regions. Also, heavy snow of up to 30 centimeters is in the forecast for mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province. Expect cloudy skies for the morning. Seoul will start off at 7 degrees. Daily highs in Seoul will reach 10 degrees. Gwangju and Gyeongju, 14 degrees. The cold wave will return to grip the whole country heading into the weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, look my way. Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Geolite Lumion Company, Ltd specializes in manufacturing retroreflective materials and heat transfer vinyl products. Geolite and Geoflex are represented as the brands of best quality reflective materials for HTV garment and heat transfer films for textile. Various types of products such as reflective materials, heat transfer films, hot vinyl are exported globally, not only to Asia but also to America, EU countries, Arabic and African countries.
Korea hydro and nuclear power envisions a world flowing with energy as clean as the blue skies, where we can enjoy energy without worrying about the planet by finding new alternative sources to achieve carbon neutrality through clean, carbon-free energy. KHNP is creating a new future for a carbon-free world. Korea hydro and nuclear power.
Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. North Korea continues to bolster ties with Russia, with a Russian regional delegation visiting the regime on Monday. This comes several days after the meeting between national security advisors of South Korea, Japan, and the United States, showing a stark contrast in security alignments. Meanwhile, North Korea has not only been removing debris from a now-destroyed Inter-Korean Joint Liaison Office, but has also been operating some South Korea-owned factories at the Kaesong Industrial Complex without authorization. What could be the regime's intention? For more details related to the tension on the peninsula, we have Shreyas Reddy, correspondent at NK News Seoul. Welcome, Shreyas.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Dr. Kim Young-gyu, Principal Researcher at East Asia Institute. Good to see you, Dr. Kim.
Thank you.
All right, first question to our Dr. Kim. Latest news first. A Russian delegation visited North Korea on Monday, and though the details regarding the purpose of the visit were not revealed, many assumed discussions could have been about the possible deployment of North Korean workers to Russia. What do you think about this visit?
Well, Pyongyang's strategy has remained fairly consistent since the collapse of the Hanoi summit in 2019, and North Korea has emphasized self-reliance, the continued development of nuclear capabilities, and a long-term perspective in its strategy toward Washington and Seoul. And they term this approach as the frontal breakthrough line, or 정면 돌파전 in Korean. In this context, it is likely that DPRK will continue pursuing self-reliance while expanding its arsenal, and they increasingly employ the narrative of the new Cold War era to demonstrate their regime's resilience against international sanctions, forging anti-U.S. coalitions with such as Russia, as you just mentioned. So the news regarding the potential dispatch of North Korean farmers or workers to border regions like Primorsky can be interpreted along this line, I think.
All right, so it could be part of efforts to make self-reliance possible. I see. Well, Shreyas, staying on issues related to North Korea, the Unification Ministry said that it detected signs that North Korea has been removing debris from the Joint Liaison Office. For those who might not be familiar, when was this liaison office established, and why was it blown up in 2020?
So the liaison office came about as a result of the Panmunjom declaration between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in April 2018. But it was officially opened in September, and it came about during a period of prolonged inter-Korean detente following North Korea's participation in the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics at the start of 2018. And during that year, there was certainly a lot of optimism about relations between the two countries. But in 2019, things started to take a bit of a turn for the worse. North Korea stopped responding to calls for dialogue. It started testing weapons, testing and developing weapons all over again. And so things continued to deteriorate a little bit. And then by 2020, June 2020, amid growing tensions, Kim Jong-un's influential sister, Kim Yo-jong, escalated the rhetoric, some anti-South Korea rhetoric, under the pretext of North Koreans' anger toward defectors, towards leaflets sent across the border by defectors and activists, criticizing the Pyongyang regime. And so North Korea threatened to shut down the liaison office, and eventually in mid-June, it blew it up altogether.
All right, thank you for explaining, Shreyas. One more. North Korea also appears to be operating some 30 South Korea-owned factories at the Kaesong Industrial Complex, and that is, of course, without authorization. Before we get to the possible intention behind North Korea's such illegal activities, could we say the regime is considering such, complex operation as economically beneficial?
Well, certainly it's no secret that North Korea has been facing economic challenges the last few years. It was already, of course, struggling, but then in the last few years, we've seen COVID border closures, continued sanctions, natural disasters really take a toll on North Korea's economy. So frankly, at this point, as they start to resume trade, gradually open up, they would certainly be looking to maximize every possible source of revenue that they can find. But at the same time, this, of course, isn't an entirely new development. Earlier this year in May, South Korean government officials said that they had observed North Korea operating 10 such factories at Kaesong. And a month before that, they also said that there appeared to be Chinese investment flowing in to help support North Korea's operations there, effectively to make it, to kind of boost their self-reliance, to make sure that they could operate it without South Korean support. And of course, with North Korea resuming trade with China in particular, the more goods they have that can go out of the country, the better for them.
Right, so it definitely goes along with what our Dr. Kim said. Right. Now, Dr. Kim, now to why North Korea is doing this. The ministry did not give any assessment of North Korea's intent for removing the debris, but some say it could be for the complete liquidation of the complex. Could you delve a little bit deeper into this?
Well, I'm not entirely sure about this, but it seems pretty natural to me, as just Mr. Sharia explained, especially considering their pursuit of the frontal breakthrough strategy that I just mentioned. According to several reports, North Korea has been operating South Korean-owned factories in the Gaza industrial complex without proper authorization, as you just mentioned. And I believe the Ministry of Unification disclosed information last May, backed by the evidence gathered from satellite imagery. And if the debris and rubble remain in place, it would impede easy operation of factories by obstructing access to the buildings, and I believe their intention is to clear these debris to enable the smooth operation of more factories, aligning with their principle of self-reliance again. And Pyongyang seems committed to doing everything possible to address the daily needs of the North Korean people, I guess.
All right, I see your point. Now, Dr. Kim, regarding all this, the ministry warned of a possible legal response to Pyongyang's illegal activity. Are there any measures South Korea can take against North Korea in this case?
Well, honestly, I'm not sure what steps we can take to change Pyongyang's course of action. The facilities are within the PRK's territory, and we lack any legal arrangement or treaties that could make binding decisions compelling Pyongyang to comply. And our diplomatic leverage typically arises when there is some level of economic interdependence, but there's none in inter-Korean relations now. According to international relations theory, the concept of sensitivity and vulnerability is often cited to explain a country's leverage in its relations with others, wherein a change in one country's action imposes a significant cost on another. But what leverage do we currently possess in our relationship with North Korea? It seems our options for effective measures are pretty much limited.
I see. So it seems not much, we can do not much about this case. All right. Now, shifting gears a little bit here, Shriz. National security advisors of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan held their three-way meeting recently. And what were the new trilateral initiatives they discussed during the meeting?
So in terms of North Korea, honestly, it was mostly a continuation of what was already going on between the three countries, particularly coming out of the Camp David summit between the leaders in August. So a lot of it was about reviewing progress on things like consulting each other on North Korean matters, intelligence sharing, and cooperation to crack down on North Korea's theft of cryptocurrency to fund its nuclear development. But beyond that, the group also agreed to prioritize other areas, for example, research in advanced technologies, critical minerals, and rechargeable batteries, working toward developing a joint supply chain early warning system and planned technology protection network. Plus, they also said that they're looking into working together to combat influence operations and disinformation, misinformation involving foreign countries.
Right, so much of it was actually the continuation of what was agreed during the Camp David summit.
Very much.
All right. Now, Dr. Kim, they further reaffirmed the importance of peace in the Taiwan Strait while discussing efforts to align the three countries' Indo-Pacific strategies. If this is part of efforts to keep China in check, what further policies are they expected to come up with?
Okay, first I have to say that I have to agree with Mr. Sharia just said that the primary focus of the meeting was North Korea, and they reviewed the progress since the Camp David summit. But as you just mentioned, China clearly factored into the strategic discussion of this trilateral meeting, and issues related to keeping China in check include a supply chain early warning initiative, maintaining peace and stability in Taiwan Strait, as you just mentioned, and ensuring freedom of navigation in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. While the official document didn't explicitly state that these measures are targeting Beijing, but it's pretty obvious that they are. And I believe the three countries will prioritize cooperation, bolster supply chain resilience, and strategic collaboration in critical technology areas such as semiconductors, batteries, quantum science, and artificial intelligence. Considering what has discussed during the Biden-Xi summit on the sidelines of APEC summit in San Francisco last November, Washington seems committed to continuing competition with China and intends to maintain high barriers in cutting-edge technology against Beijing. This small yard, high fence de-risking strategy will likely persist for some time. So I believe the ROK US-Japan policy coordination will heavily emphasize these aspects.
All right, I see your point. Now, Dr. Kim, let's now tap on the U.S. politics that are related to South Korea. House and Senate negotiators released a compromise draft of an annual defense policy bill last week, which called for maintaining 28,500 U.S. troops in South Korea and deepening nuclear deterrence coordination between Seoul and Washington. This could be seen as part of expanding its comparative advantage considering strategic competition with China, right?
Well, I don't believe everything revolves around checking China. The measures you just mentioned are actually more geared toward reassuring South Korea amid the escalating North Korean nuclear threat. A significant portion of the South Korean populace still favors a domestic nuclear program, from 50 to 70% of the population. This makes it pretty important to demonstrate the credibility of the U.S. extended deterrence and nuclear umbrella provided to South Korea. Regarding measures specifically aimed at balancing China in the draft defense policy bill, I think they include accelerating nuclear modernization, prohibiting a reduction in number of deployed nuclear missiles, and enhancing nuclear command, control, and communication programs, to name a few. The bill also places substantial emphasis on standardizing technical protocols necessary for systems to achieve interoperability. So Washington's main strategic concept and direction in competing with China revolves around the concept of integrated deterrence. But not everything is about targeting China, of course.
All right, I see your point. So the purpose could be to more, reassure South Korea in a way. Right. Now, Dr. Kim, this question just popped out in my head. I just saw an article that South Korea's defense ministry unveiled its budget. Were you able to see the news as well? How did you see it?
The South Korean defense budget? Oh, I didn't get a chance to read it yet. But surely I will check later. Yeah.
All right, I see. I think there was. I think the defense ministry was trying to boost up the budget bill. But how do you believe such a boost, if there is any, would be able to be used in order to tackle against North Korea's provocations?
So the main challenge now here is whether we should change our basis for the extended deterrence. Now, we have been talking so much about nuclear weapons, and a lot of discussions going around regarding whether we should have domestic nuclear programs or not, whether we should redeploy the tactical nuclear weapons. But I think the key challenge we face in the near future is going to be how we're going to adopt the cutting-edge development in the cutting-edge technology like AI and quantum computing in our defense program. And that is going to be the future of our defense capabilities. And I really hope that we could focus more on this area rather than using that money or preparing for more building capability on nuclear area.
All right, thank you for your advice, Dr. Kim. Now, meanwhile, a U.S. lawmaker recently proposed a bill, the Indo-Pacific Treaty Organization Act, calling on nations in the Indo-Pacific region to consider a NATO-like security apparatus to curb North Korean and Chinese threats. How do you see the chances of such an alliance?
Well, the reason why Washington couldn't establish a multilateral alliance system like NATO in Asia and had to adopt the hub-and-spoke alliance model in the region was primarily due to Japan. Unlike Europe, which resolved the German problem after World War II, Asia failed to address the Japan problem effectively. Lingering memories of Japan's brutal colonial rule in the region continue to fuel historical tensions even today. The issue would persist until the Japanese government takes some decisive measures and actions. Moreover, alliance formed in response to a common threat. Alliances like the ROK-US alliance, US-Japan alliance, primarily target North Korea. However, Indo-Pacific countries, including the United States, don't perceive North Korean military threat with the same level of seriousness as Seoul and Tokyo do. Even the official document on the outcome of the ROK-US-Japan National Security Advisor trilateral meeting shows some level of discrepancies in threat perceptions among the three countries and how they prioritize various threats differently. And consider countries like Australia, New Zealand, India, ASEAN countries. Would it be easy for them to agree on their primary national security challenge? Establishing a NATO-like alliance system in the Indo-Pacific region would not be an easy task for sure, I think.
All right, I see. Now, sure is, though our Dr. Kim said the possibility of making such, NATO-like security alliance could be a little bit hard and the possibility could be low, how might North Korea and China even view this kind of proposal?
Well, I think, of course, first, as Dr. Kim said, it is, of course, low, and I think we need to recognize that this has just been introduced. It's a long way from being passed, and certainly in an utterly divided U.S. Congress, that it seems quite unlikely. That said, China and North Korea would still be wary of such a proposal. I think both countries are always eager to jump on any chance to criticize the U.S. For attempting to exert control over the rest of the world, and particularly the Indo-Pacific region. And they've also previously compared U.S. involvement here to attempting to build a NATO-like alliance. So if this bill does progress further, they will certainly frame it as proof of Washington's desire to increase its hegemony over the world, as they often put it. That said, I do not believe the response is likely to go beyond harsh rhetoric at most. I think for them, this isn't really worth military conflict or anything like that. But they would probably use it to add it to their existing list of justifications for why the U.S. influence in this region is a bad thing, and ramp up anti-U.S. propaganda, just as they do for things like U.S. military exercises or deployment of assets to the region.
All right, I see. Now, I believe this would be our last question, but I'd like to ask both of our experts. Dr. Kim, could you start us off? The U.S. presidential election is not very far away, and all eyes are on whether Donald Trump will be able to lead his second administration. If he does, what would that mean for North Korea, and what should South Korea's diplomatic strategy be?
Well, first and foremost, nothing has decided yet, so there's no need to overly worry about this at this moment. But I've heard concerns from numerous experts regarding recent poll results and the potential return of Trump to the White House. And if this were to happen, we might need to reconsider the direction of our Indo-Pacific strategy and the value-based diplomacy initiative like the Summit for Democracy that we're going to have next year, as they are perceived as key elements of Biden's agenda. But however, it's worth noting that Trump is also the person who led the Hanoi Summit. And yes, it did result in more setbacks than successes, but nevertheless, his top-down negotiation and engagement approach could potentially offer some opportunity as well, and for us to address the North Korea problem and dealing with China. So let's wait and see how things unfold, as we have no control over U.S. presidential election anyway.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Kim. Now, Shiraz, what's your view on this?
Well, I think, of course, with Trump, it's always hard to predict anything he does. But I think one thing that we have seen is he certainly has a history of going his own way, and I think we're likely to see him upend a lot of President Biden's policies, just as he did, for example, with Iran and nuclear matters concerning Iran in his first term. And I think, as Dr. Kim mentioned, he has a top-down approach. He certainly favors that. And that was a big part of his interactions with Kim Jong-un. They often spoke about their close friendship, exchanged letters. And so there's certainly a possibility that he might choose to reach out again at a leader-to-leader level. And perhaps for Kim Jong-un also, in a way, it's a bit of an ego boost that, I'm here sitting across the table from the most powerful man in the world. That said, I think we also need to acknowledge that the global situation has changed, the regional situation has changed a lot since Trump's first term. So there are no guarantees. North Korea has isolated itself a lot. Whether they see any benefit to re-engaging with the US, particularly knowing that, frankly, as soon as the administration changes, those policies, those advantages could go away again. I think they'll certainly be a little wary either way. Another factor, perhaps a bigger factor, is how this affects the trilateral alliance between the US, South Korea, and Japan. President Biden has made it a big part of his policy that the US will work with South Korea and Japan, and certainly this favors the current leaders of South Korea and Japan as well. Yoon Suk-yeol, Fumio Kishida, they are very much fond of that approach. They're all on. They like to highlight that they're all on one page and have several initiatives that they push forward together. If Trump comes in, we certainly saw in his previous term, there were times when he did not like the idea of South Korea upstaging him, and he's threatened to pull troops out of South Korea, decrease ties. With Japan, he certainly had a good relationship with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, but that was on a personal level. And Fumio Kishida and Trump do not necessarily have the same bond. So certainly, I think both countries, both South Korea and Japan, their first priority, if he comes back, will be to find other ways to keep him on board while still letting him take center stage, and that may be hard to do.
All right, we'll have to wait and see how it goes, but a lot might change. All right, well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Shriz.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Kim, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Completely new. But some